You're taking a live look out of Moscow right now. We're learning that Ukraine said it struck a Russian airbase today, while Russia continued to strike Ukraine with hundreds of drones overnight as part of a stepped-up bombing campaign. Ukraine's military general staff said that Ukrainian forces had struck what is described as the home base of Russia's fighter jets. The general staff said in a social media post it hit a depot containing glide bombs, a training aircraft, and, quote, possibly other aircraft. Russian officials not yet commenting directly on this morning.
Russian skies lit up with flames, not from fireworks, but from Ukrainian drones slicing through the night. Deep inside Russia, where the Kremlin thought it was safe, explosions echoed as air bases burned. This wasn't just an attack. It was a warning. Nowhere is safe anymore. The war between Russia and Ukraine has taken countless dramatic turns. But what happened in early July 2025 could mark a defining moment, a shift that sent shockwaves through Russian military infrastructure, airspace security, and its already strained economy. Just one day after Russia launched an intense drone assault, deploying 300 drones in a massive barrage aimed at Ukrainian infrastructure, Ukraine struck back. And not just in retaliation, but with a carefully calculated, deeply strategic counterattack that may have redefined the battleground. On the morning of July 5, 2025, Ukrainian forces executed a coordinated strike on two of Russia's most significant air bases, the Borysoglebsk airfield in the Voronezh Oblast, located roughly 350 kilometers from the Ukrainian border, and the Engels II strategic bomber base in the Saratov region, about 700 kilometers deep into Russian territory. These were not random targets. Both installations housed vital tactical and strategic assets, including Su-34, Su-35, and Su-30SM fighter jets, along with Russia's iconic Tu-95MS strategic bombers. This was a highly advanced UAV operation, with Ukraine deploying its domestically developed UJ-26 Beaver drones for precision targeting. For the longer-range mission toward Engels, Ukraine used a modified version of the Soviet-era Tu-141 Strij drone platform, effectively repurposed into a makeshift cruise missile capable of carrying high-explosive warheads weighing up to 150 kilograms. These drones flew low, between 90 and 120 meters altitude, cruising at speeds of 140 to 160 km/h, designed specifically to evade radar detection. But Ukraine's tactic wasn't just about brute force, it was about disruption and deception. Before the main drones entered Russian airspace, a swarm of mini quadcopters was launched to saturate and confuse Russian radar systems. These multi-rotor drones flooded Russian early warning networks with false targets, giving Ukraine's main UAVs just enough room to slip through Russia's vaunted multi-layered air defenses. The results were devastating. At around 2:06 a.m., 10 consecutive explosions lit up the sky over Borysoglebsk. Satellite thermal imaging from NASA's FIRMS project showed active fire zones across the airfield, particularly around the runway. Subsequent satellite imagery confirmed that at least one Su-34 fighter was completely destroyed, and that a munition depot storing Fab 500 M62 guided bombs had been obliterated. About 40 minutes later, a second wave of strikes hit the Engels Air Base. Ukrainian UAVs targeted engine maintenance hangars and critical operational infrastructure. The base remained engulfed in fire until sunrise. Western intelligence confirmed the destruction of an NK-25 engine repair building and a key spare parts depot, despite Russian officials publicly downplaying the damage. The sophistication of Ukraine's strategy became even more evident when the two waves of UAVs were tracked. One northern column maneuvered through Sumy and Bryansk toward Voronezh, while the southern cluster flew past Luhansk and Dnipro, pushing deep into Saratov. Each cluster included 6 to 8 Beaver drones, 30 to 40 decoy UAVs, and a single Strij drone repurposed for kamikaze strikes. Russian air defenses responded, but too late. At Borysoglebsk, Short-range systems like Tor M2 and ZSU-2330 engage the targets at around 6 to 8 kilometers. In Engels, even advanced S-400 batteries opened fire only at 25 kilometers. Despite these attempts, at least 4 Beaver drones and 2 Strij cruise drones reached their intended targets. Russia's Pantsir S-1 systems, designed for close-in defense, could only engage in the final 6 seconds of the drone's descent, often too late, especially due to GPS jamming and spoofing tactics used by Ukraine. This wasn't a retaliatory stunt. It was a military doctrine in motion. Ukraine is systematically targeting Russia's air power infrastructure at its roots, trying to degrade Moscow's long-range strike capability, one of the few technological advantages Russia still holds in this conflict. And it seems to be working. In just the past month, Ukraine claims to have eliminated more than 40 Russian military aircraft, including fighters, bombers, and support planes. This latest strike is part of a broader campaign, often referred to by analysts as a spiderweb strategy, aimed at entangling Russia's vast defense infrastructure using asymmetrical warfare tools like drones. UAVs were detected across 14 different Russian regions: Voronezh, Bryansk, Belgorod, Saratov, Novgorod, Kursk, Leningrad, Oryol, Rostov, Smolensk, Ryazan, Moscow, Penza, Tula, and the Chuvash Republic. Russian governors acknowledged drone shoot-downs in some areas, 3 in Smolensk, for instance, and the Defense Ministry reported that 94 UAVs were downed in total, including 34 in Voronezh, 11 in Bryansk, and 9 each in Saratov and Belgorod. But clearly, this wasn't enough. At Borisogledsk, Russia's Su-34 fleet was reduced from 8 to 6 aircraft, while its supply of KB series smart bombs dropped by 25%. At Engels, the presence of 2 95MS bombers on open runways led to delayed sorties, disrupting long-range cruise missile operations for over 24 hours. These setbacks forced Russia's Aerospace Command to scale back nighttime bombing missions, easing pressure on Ukraine's frontline defenses. The psychological and logistical consequences were enormous. To protect remaining airbases, Russia withdrew S-300 and S-400 air defense batteries from the Western Front, leaving gaps in air cover that could be exploited in future Ukrainian offensives. Meanwhile, Russian civilian aviation took a direct hit. Major airports like Sheremetyevo in Moscow were shut down. In total, over 170 flights were delayed and nearly 50 were outright canceled. Airports in St. Petersburg, Ulyanovsk, Saratov, Kirov, and others faced widespread chaos. Passengers waited for hours, some even lying on mats and terminal floors as they awaited rerouted or rescheduled flights. Even as operations resumed later in the day, the damage to public trust in Russian air security was done. This was no longer just a military problem. It had become a domestic security crisis. But this exposed weakness isn't just about drones slipping past defenses. It reflects a broader problem in Russia's defense industrial base. With heavy Western sanctions in place and access to critical parts blocked, Russia is struggling to maintain, let alone expand, its military manufacturing output. One major example is the Kazan aviation plant in Tatarstan, responsible for building and upgrading 2 160M bombers, 2 22M3 aircraft, and even civilian jets. While satellite images show ongoing construction and new facilities, actual aircraft production has stagnated. In 2024 alone, only 2 new strategic bombers were delivered. Why? Because building an aircraft requires more than buildings. It requires specialized parts, skilled labor, and functioning supply chains. All 3 are now in short supply. Russia's ambitious goals, such as producing 4 Tu-214 passenger jets in 2025 and increasing Sukhoi fighter output by 30%, seem increasingly unrealistic. Even worse, over 1,500 staff members were laid off from the United Aircraft Corporation, the very company tasked with fulfilling these targets. Military experts like Alexander Kovalenko and Marko Eklund argue that despite factory expansions, Russia's aviation industry is in decline. The Kremlin's focus on drones and ammunition has diverted resources away from aircraft production, a trade-off that's weakening Russia's long-term air power. But the challenges don't stop there. Russia's entire economy is showing signs of stagnation. While military spending once drove production and kept factories running, it now appears to be dragging the economy down. In June 2025, Russia's Purchasing Managers' Index, PMI, fell to a 3-year low, signaling contraction across multiple industries. Factories are cutting shifts, sending workers home, and slowing down operations. Even giants like Rostselmash, a key manufacturer of agricultural equipment, are facing early shutdowns. The rising cost of raw materials, weak domestic demand, and collapsing exports are compounding the crisis. Consumer confidence is dropping, real wages are stagnant, and inflation is hurting everyday Russians. In some regions, electricity companies like Rossetti Siberia have declared bankruptcy, raising industrial power rates and triggering fear of a broader recession. The ruble, once stable, has become a symbol of uncertainty. Russians are calculating each purchase, choosing between food, heating, and mobile bills. Despite this, the Kremlin continues to project confidence. President Putin, in a recent speech, dismissed the concerns with humor, quoting Mark Twain, "Reports of my death are greatly exaggerated." But behind closed doors, even top ministers are ringing alarm bells. Economy Minister Maxim Reshetnikov has warned of a coming stagnation. Finance Minister Anton Siluanov described the situation as a perfect storm. High interest rates, currently at 21%, skyrocketing defense spending, now nearly 40% of the budget, and a shrinking private sector paint a grim picture. To avoid a total collapse in 2022, the Kremlin injected the economy with war-driven stimulus, keeping defense factories running and unemployment low. But this artificial growth is now wearing off. Defense spending is eating into social programs, investment is drying up, and banks are weighed down by politically motivated loans with little chance of repayment. Even China's backdoor supply channels are slowing, and with oil prices hovering below $65 per barrel, Russia's budget is bleeding. Forecasts are being downgraded. Standard & Poor's cut Russia's growth estimate from 4.5% to 1.4%. According to analysts at CSIS, the biggest risk is now a banking crisis fueled by bad debt and unsustainable military loans. So, while Russia might be able to survive drone strikes, it may not survive the economic firestorm they're triggering. The Kremlin's long-standing boast, "We can outspend the West," is beginning to unravel. The question now is not just about military might. It's about how long Russia can sustain a war economy that's draining its strength from within. What do you think? Is Russia entering a slow collapse from the inside? Share your thoughts in the comments.